The first time Jonah Mercer saw the Comanche girl, she was standing in his dead wife's garden with a rifle in one hand and his little daughter tucked behind her skirts. The beans had gone wild along the fence that summer, climbing the poles in crooked green spirals, and the moon was so bright on the dry yard it made every stone look sharpened. Jonah had come back late from the north pasture with dust on his tongue and rope burned fresh across his palm. He had been thinking about nothing deeper than water for the horse and whether Ellen's old kettle would last one more winter. Then he saw a stranger in the patch of silver light beside the cabin, and every quiet thing in him went hard at once. His hand went to the Colt at his hip. The girl did not lift the rifle. She kept it angled toward the ground, but ready. She could not have been more than 19. Her braid had partly come loose. One cheek was streaked with ash. There was blood on the cuff of her deerskin sleeve that had dried nearly black. His daughter, May, clutched a fistful of the stranger's dress and peered around her with wide, frightened eyes. "Don't draw," the girl said. Her voice was low and steady and carried no wasted motion. "If I meant you dead, you would not be hearing me." That did something strange to Jonah. Not the threat, the truth of it. He had spent too many years among men who talked loud to hide the fact they were guessing. This girl sounded like somebody who had already measured the night and found a clean path through it. "May," he said without looking away from the stranger, "come here." His daughter shook her head. "She saved me." That was the second thing that changed the night. Before we go any further, settle in wherever you are and tell us in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Stories like this travel a long way better when they know whose evening they're keeping company with. Jonah kept his hand on the Colt. "Saved you from what?" May swallowed. "Mr. Pritchard's hired men. They came looking for you. I hid by the smokehouse and a snake got under the boards and I couldn't move and she pulled me out before they saw." The girl's eyes never left Jonah's face. "The men were waiting by your barn road after dark. 3 of them. One had a scar through his eyebrow. They said if you would not sell by Sunday, they'd make the place cheaper after a funeral." Jonah knew the man with the scar. Amos Pike. He rode for Edwin Pritchard, the biggest cattle buyer between the Brazos Crossings and the Cross Timbers. Pritchard had spent 6 months buying up desperate claims and another 6 sending word to the ones who refused. Jonah had been refusing in a calm, stubborn way that made richer men feel insulted. "And why?" Jonah asked. "Would a Comanche girl pull my child from danger instead of riding on?" A breeze moved through the beans. Somewhere out in the dark a nightjar gave its lonely, falling cry. Then she said, "Because if those men kill you tonight, my uncle kills their people by morning, and by noon your people come for mine, and there will be enough fire on this creek to light the whole county." She took one breath. "I have come to stop it." He stared at her. There were moments when a man's whole life divided cleanly in two. Before a sentence. After it. "Your name?" he said. "No Kona Saa. My grandmother called me Sani because it was shorter for white mouths." "Mine aren't white enough for foolishness," Jonah said. "What exactly are you asking?" She looked past him at the house, at the dark porch where Ellen used to shell peas in the evenings, at the empty chair Jonah still had not moved because grief could make a shrine out of plain furniture. Then she said the wildest thing he had ever heard spoken under a quiet sky. "Marry me before dawn." May made a sound halfway between a gasp and a delighted squeak. Jonah felt the world tilt. "You lost your mind on the ride in," he said. "No. I lost my brother last winter. My mother in the sickness before that. My patience with proud men soon after. My mind is what I still have." She shifted the rifle to her other hand. "If I stand beside you as nothing, they hear only a Comanche woman. If you stand beside me as nothing, my uncle hears only a settler. But a husband is not nothing. A wife is not nothing. Kin can speak where enemies only bleed." The idea was madness, which was how Jonah knew it might be the only thing strong enough to work. He took May behind him at last. The child came willingly now, but kept hold of the blue ribbon at Sani's wrist as though she had already chosen a side. Jonah noticed it then. The girl was shaking, only a little, and only in the hand not holding the rifle. Fear, yes, but not for herself. "Come inside," he said. The cabin still smelled faintly of dried sage and old coffee. Ellen had been gone nearly 3 years, dead in childbed with a son who never took a full breath, but certain rooms kept her anyway. The pine chest under the window. The quilt folded exact at the bedfoot. The yellow crock where she used to keep bacon grease. Grief had worn thin enough not to stab every hour. It had not worn out. Sani stood just inside the door, watching everything with the alert stillness of a deer at water. Not timid. Measuring. She noticed the second cup left hanging by the stove, the child's slate on the table, the mended shirts, the medicine jar nearly empty on the shelf. "You do all this alone?" she asked. "Mostly," he said. May climbed onto a chair. "He can bake biscuits if the oven isn't sulking." It was the first almost laugh Jonah had heard in his own house in months. Sani's mouth moved at one corner, then settled again. He lit the lamp. "Tell it straight." And she did. Edwin Pritchard wanted the spring meadow below both camps, the long green stretch where clear water widened and grass stayed sweet even in August. Settlers watered cattle there. Sani's people cut through it on the old trail and sometimes camped beyond the sycamores. The army had no proper hold on the country during the war back east, and line camps were thin as hope. So Pritchard had made a plan fit for a snake. He would send hired men in stolen blankets to strike 2 cabins at dawn, leave sign that pointed west, and let the settlers ride hot into Sani's uncle's camp. While blood answered blood, he would claim the meadow as abandoned danger and buy the burnt-out widows for pennies. By winter, he'd own both the water and the story. Jonah listened without moving. When she finished, May had gone pale. "How do you know this?" he asked. Sani looked at the blood on her sleeve. "Because my cousin found out first. They killed him at the Cut Bank crossing and left him for coyotes. I found him before the sun did." He still had the paper. From inside her dress, she drew a folded sheet and handed it over. Jonah read slowly. He could read better than most men around the creek and never bragged on it. Beef weights. Rail figures. 3 names for payment. Amos Pike. Harlan Creed. Jesse Pritchard, the owner's son. And 1 line in a cramped, ugly hand. "Burn north first. Make it look right." He set the paper down very carefully. "Why come to me?" She met his eyes. "Because 3 weeks ago my uncle took a lame sorrel gelding near the old ford, and your daughter cried so hard at the fence that you crossed with no rifle and offered blankets for him back. Because you spoke to me as if I were listening. Because men who still know how to be gentle with children do not usually set fires with sleeping people inside." Jonah felt that hit where no bullet could. Ellen used to say a man's true shape showed best in the moments nobody planned to witness. He had not known anyone had been watching. There it was, the choice set plain before him. Keep his head down. Protect only his own. Pretend he had never seen the paper and let the county decide what kind of killing would follow. Or stand up with a woman half the settlement would call an enemy and gamble his land, his name, and maybe his daughter's future on the hope that truth could still outrun greed. The easy road was right there. He hated it on sight. "There isn't a preacher between here and Weatherford who'd do it," he said. May piped up at once. "Brother Ellis would." Jonah blinked. "Brother Ellis is 90 if he's a day." 92, May said. "And he married Mrs. Bell's niece to that blacksmith from Denton even when everybody muttered about it. He said heaven was too busy to sort folks by gossip." Sani looked at the child as if seeing sunlight in a storm. "I like your daughter." "She's 8, Jonah said. "And she's not my daughter by blood. My brother's girl." He paused. "But she's mine all the same." Something passed across Sani's face then. A wound answering a wound. She said quietly, "I had a little brother who held my hand that way." No one spoke for a moment. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the smell of cedar smoke from the direction of the lower creek. Jonah went still. "They've started." He took down the shotgun over the mantel, checked the shells, pulled on his black church coat because it was the only one without a tear. Then he looked at the girl who had ridden into his life with blood on her sleeve and war at her back. "If I do this," he said, "I do not do it halfway." Sani gave one small nod. "Neither do I." They rode to Brother Ellis in the hour before dawn, with May wrapped in Jonah's old army blanket and the stars fading one by one over the pecans. The old preacher lived in a 2-room shack behind the half-built church at Miller's Bend, where bats slept in the rafters and hymn books outnumbered chairs. He opened the door in long underwear and spectacles, stared at the 3 of them, and said, "Well, this is either providence or fatigue." "Could be both," Jonah said. The ceremony took place with the lamps smoking and chickens stirring under the floorboards. No flowers, no music, just a cracked Bible, a witness in nightclothes, and a child too awake for dawn. Brother Ellis asked if they came of their own will. Jonah heard Sani say yes in a voice that did not shake. When it was his turn, the The word caught for half a heartbeat on the memory of Ellen's hand in his, fever hot and slipping away. Then he said yes to. May untied the blue ribbon from Sani's wrist and looped it around both their joined hands because there were no rings. Brother Ellis looked at the ribbon, looked at the two of them, and something old and kind in his face deepened. What the frightened world refuses to bless, he murmured, the brave sometimes must. Then he married them. No kiss, no grand speech, only silence after the vows. And in that silence Jonah became sharply aware of Sani beside him. The warmth of her hand through the ribbon, the fact that a stranger's courage had just crossed the threshold into his keeping. When they stepped back outside, dawn was leaking pink into the east, and smoke was rising from the lower creek in two thin black columns. Too late to prevent the first blow, not too late for the second. They reached the settlement store just as the men were gathering, armed and wild-eyed. Mrs. Harwood's chicken house had been burned. Caleb Dorr's barn door hacked apart. A horse gone. A boy cut across the shoulder trying to save the saddles. Every frightened voice on the porch was already leaning west. Then Jonah rode into the yard with Sani beside him and made between them like a living oath. No one spoke at first. Then the whole porch exploded. Mercer lost his senses. He brought one of them here. Lord Almighty, is that paint on her hands? Edwin Pritchard came out last, buttoning his gloves. He was a broad man with a good coat, careful whiskers, and the smooth sort of politeness that made weaker men forget to notice rot. His son Jesse stood a half step behind him, pale and restless. Pritchard's gaze flicked to the ribbon around Jonah's wrist and Sani's, still tied there. What kind of spectacle is this? He asked. Jonah swung down from the saddle. A marriage, and the end of your plan. He handed the paper to Sheriff Bellamy, who had just ridden in from the North Trail with sleep still creased in his face. Bellamy read once, then again, slower. Jesse Pritchard went white as lard. Edwin did not. Men like him had grown too practiced at standing calm in poison. A forged note and an Indian tale, he said mildly. You'd better hope your new wife is worth the laugh you'll become. Sani sat her horse like something born there. My cousin died carrying that note. Amos Pike killed him with a gun that misfires low because the barrel is bent left at the mouth. He also wears his spur straps crossed because he learned backward and was too proud to change. I can show the sheriff where the body lies and the tracks that lead to your son's chestnut gelding. A hush fell so complete Jonah could hear tack leather creak. Jesse took one involuntary step back. There it was. Fear. Not the clean kind, but the guilty kind. Sani looked at the men on the porch and said, very quietly, people call us savage when what they really mean is that we remember who struck first. That line landed hard. You tell me, if you had been standing there with smoke still in the morning air, would you have ridden for vengeance or stopped long enough to hear the person everyone told you was the enemy? Let me know in the comments, because that answer says more about a soul than most sermons ever do. Sheriff Bellamy lifted his head. Nobody rides west until I see that crossing. Nobody. He looked at Pritchard. Not even you. Pritchard smiled without warmth. You think one girl's accusation outweighs a season of raids. Today I think a dead courier and your son's face are enough to earn a closer look. The ride to the Cutbank crossing felt like traveling inside a held breath. Jonah rode beside Sani, not touching, yet newly aware of every inch between them. Men trailed behind. Pritchard and Jesse too. The ground opened into limestone shelves and cottonwoods at the bend, and even before they dismounted, the place told on itself. Drag marks. Blood gone brown. A broken silver concho in the reeds. Tracks piling over tracks. Sani slid from the saddle and moved through the sign as though she were reading scripture written in dust. 3 horses came from the east, she said. 1 from the south after. The body was dragged here. He tried to crawl. See where his hand dug. He wore moccasins, but the men who killed him did not. 1 boot heel is split at the edge. That is Amos Pike's. Bellamy crouched, following where she pointed. Jonah saw Pritchard's face change by a degree. Not much. Enough. Then Jesse broke. I didn't mean for the boy to die, he blurted. The words cracked the world open. Pritchard wheeled on him. Shut your mouth. But panic is a mule that kicks hardest once it starts. Jesse kept spilling. Pike hit the courier first. Amos wanted more money. The settlers were supposed to be frightened, not buried. The Comanche camp was supposed to strike back. The meadow was supposed to clear by autumn. He said it all in stumbling pieces while the men around him stared, as if a familiar house had suddenly shown them bones instead of walls. Pritchard went for Bellamy's gun. After that, the day moved fast. Jonah knocked the sheriff aside and caught Pritchard at the wrist. The pistol discharged into the bank, dirt blasting his face. Jesse shouted. Bellamy swore. Horses reared. Pike, who had followed at a distance, fired from the cottonwoods and caught one of the settlers through the hat brim. Men dropped for cover. Somebody screamed that riders were coming from the west. They were. Sani's people, arrows and carbines flashing between the trees, having seen armed settlers massing near the crossing and come ready for the worst. For one vicious second, the whole future balanced on a pin. This was the moment the world expected blood. Sani snatched Bellamy's fallen pistol, climbed the limestone outcrop above the crossing, and fired once into the sky. The cracks silenced everybody. Then she shouted first in Comanche, then in English, with a force that seemed bigger than her body could hold. I am wife to Jonah Mercer before God and witnesses. The men who burned the cabins were hired by Pritchard. The dead boy was ours. The lie was his. If you want justice, take him. If you want war, shoot me first and wear the shame forever. No one moved. On the west bank, an older Comanche rider with silver at his temples stared up at her. Her uncle, Jonah guessed. On the east side, settlers looked from Sani to Pritchard to the sheriff with the stunned expressions of men watching the road under their feet change direction. Pritchard snarled and lunged toward the horses. Jonah drew and fired. He had always been the quiet man people mistook for softness. He did not boast, did not threaten, did not drink himself loud in public. Men like Pritchard had spent years reading that quiet as weakness. The bullet took Pritchard through the shoulder and spun him into the creek stones. Not luck, not accident. The exact, measured shot of a man who had spent too many evenings teaching himself steadiness because panic had killed enough in his life already. Bellamy had irons on him before he could rise. Amos Pike tried to run. Sani's uncle cut him off at the sycamore roots like a gate slamming shut. And just like that, the war that had been building all night lost its richest voice. The quiet after violence can feel cruel in its own way. A mocking kind of peace. Water over stone. Wind and leaves. Somebody far off crying with relief instead of grief. May came stumbling down the bank where Mrs. Harwood had tried and failed to hold her back. Jonah caught her with his good arm. She buried her face in his coat and shook. Sani climbed down from the rock at last. Up close, the iron had gone out of her face, leaving only exhaustion and a grief so old it seemed carved there. Her uncle dismounted. He studied the ribbon at her wrist, the child clinging to Jonah, the hand Bellamy kept locked on Pritchard's shoulder. Then he said, "You have done a dangerous thing." Sani answered, "So had he." She tipped her head toward Pritchard. Mine was just cleaner. Something like pride flickered in the old man's eyes. The settlers took their dead home. The Comanche carried their boy west wrapped in a red blanket. No one fired another shot. At sunset, after statements were taken and Pike was chained beside his employer in the sheriff's wagon, Jonah found Sani alone by the spring meadow. The grass brushed gold against her skirt. The water carried a strip of dying sky. She had washed the blood from her sleeve, but not all of it came out. He stood beside her without speaking. That seemed best. After a while she said, "When my mother died, people kept speaking around me as if I were made of smoke. I learned then that grief makes some people kind and some people cowardly." Jonah looked over the meadow Pritchard had nearly drowned in blood for profit. When Ellen died, men brought casseroles and advice. Most of it was about how fast I ought to recover, so they'd feel easier near me. Sani gave a tired, surprised breath that might have been a laugh. They stood there with the frogs starting up in the reeds and the evening cool settling into their clothes. Then she said the line he would remember for the rest of his life. "Some wounds don't close," she murmured. "They just stop asking to be hidden." He turned to her. Really turned. The last of the light caught the fine scar near her chin, the one he'd not noticed before. The strength in the set of her mouth. The loneliness. God, the loneliness. Not emptiness. Capacity with nowhere safe to go. He said, "You don't have to leave tonight." She looked at him for a long time. "Your people won't like that. Most of them didn't like me before breakfast. I have survived it." That time she did smile. If this story has reached you right where you live, that is who it was written for. Leave a like, subscribe if you haven't yet, and stay with us. These endings matter because so many people out there were never given one. Pritchard's fall was not quick. It was better than quick. The note led to more notes. The notes led to accounts. The accounts led to stolen cattle, burned claims, bribes paid to a state buyer in Waco, and 2 earlier killings that had been laid at Comanche feet because dead men from the plains made easier villains than wealthy ones from a dining table. Jesse testified to save his own skin and lost his father's respect, his inheritance, and eventually his own freedom anyway when the court discovered how deep he had ridden into the fraud. Amos Pike swung for murder before the first frost. Edwin Pritchard died slower, inside a prison hospital with half his fortune eaten by legal claims and the rest seized to repay widows he had tried to starve off their land. Justice does not always come in thunder. Sometimes it comes as paperwork, witnesses, patience, and a cell door closing on the right man at last. The Spring Meadow was never bought by one hand again. A written agreement was drawn, rough but honored, for shared water and grazing passage. Settlers still kept rifles by their doors. Sani's people still rode wary through cedar shadow. Peace was not magic. It was work done daily by tired people who had seen too much fire and wanted their children to inherit something other than stories of revenge. Sani stayed. At first in the small room off the kitchen with May curled beside her like a kitten that had picked its person. Then in the main room once winter came hard and the north wind found every crack in the boards. Jonah repaired the roof. She gentled the sorrel gelding nobody else could shoe without getting kicked. He taught her to read English from old almanacs and seed invoices. She taught him the sky's smaller moods, the difference between dust that meant cattle and dust that meant riders, the way to listen to a horse's breathing before trusting its calm. They did not fall in love quickly, because that would have insulted everything broken in them. They fell in love the honest way, in biscuits left warm under a towel when one of them came in late, in the quiet passing of a lantern. In the first night, May woke crying from a nightmare and called for both of them without thinking. In spring, when Jonah found Sani in Ellen's old garden pressing bean seeds into the earth with one careful thumb, as if grief and hope could live in the same row and neither crowd the other out. Years later, May would say that was when she knew for certain the marriage had stopped being a shield and become a home. The epilogue people liked best came much later. A June evening. The porch Jonah finally rebuilt wide enough for 3 chairs and a cradle. May 12 years old and reading aloud with all the drama God gave her. A baby boy asleep against Sani's shoulder, his fist tangled in the blue ribbon she had kept all that time. Fireflies rising over the meadow below, where no smoke climbed now except the good kind from cook fires and summer suppers. And Jonah, older and lined and more at peace than the lonely widower on the moonlit porch could ever have imagined, looking at his wife as if gratitude itself had taken human shape. He had once thought a home was the place where nothing more could be taken from you. Age taught him better. Home was where what had been broken and you finally found something gentle enough to rest against. Below them, the spring meadow shone under the last light like a long green promise, and the evening held.